I had a copy of the painting, the Vermeer painting that the book is based on, hanging in my house or my flat or wherever I was for many, many years, since I was 19. And I've always been fascinated by her because of the look on her face. It's a look that's ambiguous. And I could never tell whether she was happy or sad, how old she was, what color her eyes were, what color her hair was, what she was thinking at that moment. She seemed it seemed like such a specific, intimate look that she was giving us, and yet it also seemed very universal. And I wanted to try to find my way into that look. And one day I was looking at it and the painting, and I just thought, for the first time, I thought of Vermeer and what it was, how he was involved in that look. So it wasn't just her looking at us, it was also what was he looking at her. And I thought, what did he do to her to make her look like that? And I thought there's a relationship there. So I wanted to find out what that relationship was. And that was what the book came out of. Very little is known about him except very concrete details, like his birth date, his death date. He married a Catholic woman, so he probably converted. His mother-in-law was quite well off, propertied. He probably lived with her. He was the head of the guild at the time, but twice head of the guild. So he would have had formal training as a painter, joined the guild, became a well-respected painter if he's going to be the head of the guild twice. And he also died relatively young. He's aged 43, and he had what they think was probably a stroke or a heart attack, heavily in debt. And he had 11 children. So that's sort of the structure. That's all we know. And the time itself was an interesting one in that the Netherlands was really only coming together as a nation. I mean, nationhood is a very modern term. So it's only coming together, and it had sort of thrown off the reign of the Spanish, had reigned them for 100 years. They had been sort of at war with them. And so it was becoming a very Protestant country. And Vermeer had grown up Protestant and became Catholic when he married. So there's a real, I think, a kind of difference. He was a slight otherness to him in that he grew up in the mainstream and yet stepped aside for whatever reason, whether it was for love or whatever he did. And I think that puts him slightly outside normality, so to speak. And I tended to see him as quite a solitary man, partly because he paints solitary people so well. I think he really understands what it is like to be alone in a room and to relish being alone in a room. He also painted very, very slowly, very meticulously. So I think he was probably somewhat anal retentive, and also put his art above everything else. The foundation stone of his personality, since we don't really know what he was like, I had to decide. And the thing that I looked for in those few facts that we knew about him was that he painted these very quiet, calm paintings, usually of women, and very few children or older people. And yet he had 11 children. And I thought, 11 children in a house is a really noisy, huge household. And how did he manage to separate out his art from that household? He must have had to compartmentalize his life quite a lot. And I think that would have been unusual then, when there was a period of no privacy, such a huge family, not a huge house. What did he do? And he carved out a space for himself. And I think that says a lot about him as a man. And that's the sort of the cornerstone that I built his personality on. We sold the book very early on, before it was even published. And in retrospect, I'm really glad we did that. There were times when I thought afterwards, when the book had a success that none of us ever dreamed it would. And I thought, if I had waited, I expect I could have made a killing and all that. But that's not why I want a film made of it. I don't make a film for money. It's not about that. And so at the time, but I like to say that I wouldn't have ever sold out for a lot of money if somebody had made me an offer. But the reality is, who knows if I would have. I'm glad I wasn't ever put in that position. But when I met the people from Archer Street, I became immediately aware that they were concerned to what they called remain close to the emotional truth of the book. Now, clearly a film is different from a book, and I knew that. I accepted that. I'm a grown-up, so I let it go. But I trusted them to do the right thing with it, and I was glad to to sort of accompany them on the sidelines of it. I never had anything officially to do with the making of it or the writing of it, but we got on very well, and so I was always happy to cheer on the sidelines. Making a screenplay of a novel, you have to cut out a lot of stuff and simplify things and dramatize things in different ways. And there were moments where she added visual elements that I read and I thought, oh, I wish I had thought of that. Why didn't I do that? Or why didn't I strengthen the relationship between this character and this character, or make that triangle stronger? Fantastic. She really understood the structure. She took apart and put back together the structure of the story and knew how it worked, all of its many parts, in a way that I didn't know because I just wrote it instinctively. And so I think in a funny way, she actually knows the story much better than I do.